Good. So the students are in their computers, I guess. Okay, great, great. Thank you. So, yeah, let me know. Shall I start? Good. Okay, great. Let me restart then where we left. Yes, I was actually talking about referring to polvo preciado. And so, yeah, I'm going to start from here. So I was actually quoting Paulo Preciado in the article that he published in our forum, in which he mentioned that today we're moving from a written society to a civil society, from an organic society to a digital society, from an industrial economy to an immaterial economy. And in my way, have reflect how, due to all these changes, the limits of our houses and the nature of our homes are shifting radically. Online platforms, as you know, not only allow people to work from home, and we have seen that during increasing a lot during pandemic, but also to market themselves as bodies, their possessions, and their services online easily. In some cases, these new social patterns have actually just further extractivist regime and social imbalances. But in others, however, they have contributed to new asymmetries. So they provide new forms, new openness, new forms of reconciliation that are extremely interesting. And in this scenario, the house is no longer a space where we have our belongings and a space for caring, or not just that, but a multi-connected transient space that changes with the use of digital tools. In a way, houses have become much more urban, much more rooted within the city. Uses and functions merge more and more and diffuse themselves. And modern design criteria that, such as, for instance, the definition of a space spread program that used to define housing and the city at large, are nowadays completely outdated. And that's actually how I was trained in the school before. Everything was based on planning and programming. And despite these changes, our built environment is still being built mainly by modern apartments addressed to a nuclear family structure, an idea of a nuclear family structure defined by a couple and one or two kids. However, our social structures and ways of living are much more diverse and complex. And actually, just consider that just around 30% of the EU society can be classified under that description of nuclear family. So what happens with the rest, with the 70%? So the widespread typology is precisely this one, in which the living room and the master bedrooms are the main spaces, defining clear family behaviors and hierarchies. And the type of, and it's very important to be aware of that this type of arrangement not only empowers heteropatriarchal biases and behaviors, but also neglects wider social realities and ways of living. That's 70%. This circumstance related with the fact that most of our actual housing laws, so this is more or less the structure that I'm referring to. And this, as I was mentioning, this circumstance relates with the fact that most of our housing laws and regulations push developers and public sectors and the institutions to build just this one type of living, putting a lot of weight on citizens. And I'm just referring to our Catalan law, but I'm pretty sure that if you look in your region, the law will be actually similar. And in Mayo, we have been exploring non-conforming spaces, or we like to call it them like that, and also practices of care, non-conforming practices of care. We claim the need of dismantling modern biases, those that we have inherent, in particular those that relate with the modern house, in order to produce diverse and inclusive ways of living, able to welcome a wider social settings. But also we claim the need to define a built environment able to respond to actual cybernetic reality. We cannot deny that, while breaking down those destructivist practices that I was referring to. We're critical with actual architecture norms and laws. So we love to read laws, and that's actually a very important tool for us. And we're very critical with them, precisely those that empower biases, social biases. And we like to think that sometimes what we do is to dismantle them, to dismantle the laws and those biases through finding legal loopholes. And we will talk about that. Other times we just turn visible and balanced constructions that we have inherit in order to transgress them. So today in this talk, I will talk about biased architectural norms and modern biases. We will talk about non-conforming spaces, legal loopholes, how to transgress actual laws, and ways to define norms that have the potentiality to be transgressed in the future. One of our first projects that we designed was precisely this exhibition. It was an exhibition display for a show about George Perec's book, Species of Spaces. And the curator asked us to focus just on those chapters that address domestic spaces. We use the commission as an excuse to define a built statement about non-conforming domesticity through the idea of equality. We were doing this statement as a reaction to that housing built reality that I was referring to. And like it happens with this art piece by the artist Nicholas Reck, where all the characters of the comic book have been removed, and suddenly one can think that infinite stories can happen within the same background. Likewise, for our displays, we create a series of generic rooms in which the specificity of its space was defined by its content, by the objects displayed, not by the continent. The character of each space, as I was referring, was defined by the art pieces, the artworks inside, rather than by its enclosure. So suddenly one felt being in a bedroom because the art pieces were related with that domestic room, the same with the living room, and so on and so on and so on. And this idea of generic rooms that allow several ways of being occupied and perceived was precisely the aim behind 110 Rooms, a collective housing building that we built in Barcelona, and it was finished 2016. We actually started the project 10 years ago. So for us, feels like a long time. And our housing is placed in the neighborhood of Eixample, which is characteristic by its resiliency. We have been always fascinated by the fact that the neighborhood has changed from, has a strict order in which all disorder can happen. I'm pretty sure you have this neighborhood in mind. It's a well-known one. And it is defined by this homogeneity, while at the same time, all heterogeneity happens within. And the area has been extremely malleable. It has changed from being housing to offices, and nowadays it's coming back to housing once again. And these changes have happened almost without changing its physiognomy. So thinking about climate change and being responsible, it is radically sustainable on that note. And the key of this flexibility is the nature of its original 19th century housing type, which is defined by semi-equal spaces, to the point that from our biased modern perspective and point of view, it is quite difficult to distinguish where was the kitchen or the living room or the bedroom, for instance, without showing the furniture drawn. And that's because, as you see, the spaces are kind of similar. And beyond its ambiguity, we kind of love the banality of it. We love the capacity of ordinary things. And following that ambiguity and that non-prescriptive character, we basically did a reenactment of a past. Our building is designed as a system of similar rooms in which domestic programming is not predetermined. Any room can host any use. bedrooms, living rooms, or even the kitchen actually can be placed in any of the spaces, thanks to a strategic position of the supplies that do run through the bathrooms. So every room, as you see, you have a point of contact with the bathroom. That facilitates the flexibility. And we call it 110 rooms because it is composed by 110 spaces that can be potentially arranged, forming different apartment sizes. So each apartment can be sized and programmed depending on the need by adding and subtracting rooms. So with this building, we were not only claiming to have non-hierarchical spaces and abstract domestic spaces, able to welcome wider social realities beyond, that idea of a nuclear family type that I was referring before, but also to imagine flexible domestic limits in order to define an inclusive structure able to adapt its organization to diverse social realities and life-changing needs, and we can easily imagine them. Surface adaptability, and therefore housing cost adaptability, consume cost adaptability, provides answers to social impacts as labor instability, or the impact of a family restructuring, the impact of aging, and many other social changes that we are very familiar in the EU, in Europe. For its first years, its floor was divided as a set of 4 apartments of 5 rooms. Rooms are connected, no corridor is needed. And actually the patios were left roofless. I'll show it afterwards. They allow natural ventilation inside, something very important to assure a good comfort and reduction of consumes. And this capacity to redefine the limits of each apartment, expanding or reducing its surface, was actually characteristic of the kitchenless typology. That's referring to the study that it was mentioned at the introduction, the kitchenless city. And this kitchenless typology, we have researched about it for a long time, and it came out at the end of the 19th century in New York. And what is interesting is that the typology allowed the disappearance of the kitchen so they were kitchenless from the physical space of the house, and involved at the time, end of the 19th century, a whole reconfiguration of the domestic realm, and especially involved a redefinition of the role of women at home. And the history of these apartments dates back to the economic depression that followed the American Civil War in 1865, so almost more than 150 years ago, when due to the lack of land and housing stock in most of US cities, there was the need to build apartments at lower cost. Appeared then different dwelling typologies that engulf some of probably consciously or unconsciously, some of the collective care formulas that the so-called social utopists envisioned at the beginning of the 19th century. And here I'm referring to Fourier, Saint-Simon, Owen, for instance, right? And what was very interesting is that life in these new apartments was extremely popular from the beginning, as they constitute an alternative that answered to the need of redefined care, especially for working women. And let me also refer here that we are in a moment, end of the 19th century, in which there's a huge introduction of women into industrial labor, and at the same time, we are seeing the impact of the dismantling of slavery in the US. So there's a deep need to redefine care labor. And proof of the diversity of the dwellers and the inhabitants is also the diverse range of sizes and housing costs. So we can see very tiny apartments as this one, with 2 rooms and a bedroom, to extremely large ones as the one that you have in the image, with several rooms but no kitchen. And at the end of this 19th century, it was started to be very common in these buildings to offer wider flexibility in the composition of apartments. And I'm missing one slide, this one. For instance, the San Remo, the one that you have here, it's which actually it is the one that influenced our 110 rooms, offer different apartment size. And the key of this flexibility was a room that it was placed in between apartments, allowing each of them to expand or communicate simultaneously. But I could lecture for another whole hour about kitchenless city. I'm just going to give you a glimpse to understand the impact of this research work that this research work had in Mayo and other projects that we will see. Let's go back to 110 and Barcelona. So the facade actually continues the fabric and the historical context. It is kind of a reenactment once again. In the neighborhood, there was a tradition to represent the past of the site through the motifs of the facade. And our site, there used to be a textile industry that fabricated some gloves. So we used the pattern of those gloves over the facade. And it might seem too abstract, but the neighbors recognized immediately the pattern, establishing a cultural bond with those that lived close by and knew its past. And the ground floor, it's kind of also a reenactment of an architectural tradition in the neighborhood in which the best materials and the spaces are arranged in order to define the image of the collective and define a space for communal gathering and representation. And what is very beautiful, if you come and pass by, you'll see that from the street one can see the life of the backyard and vice versa. So there's a lot of permeability. And the patio, as I was referring, so that you can see this garden from the street, and the patio that I was referring before, this one is open to the sky. So it rains indoors, allowing this diffusion of the perspective livings between the street and the building and the interior of the building. And this project influenced, actually, we're very, very happy because influenced actual Barcelona municipal housing policies. Obviously, it's not only thanks to 110, but also other similar domestic proposals arose at the time following 110. And what we have seen is that current actual social housing tenders in the city of Barcelona consider social justice perspectives in their briefs, which is extremely important, promoting typologies, social housing typologies that dismantle former heteropatriarchal biases. So yes, things can change, and this is very important. Laws can change. So, and nowadays, finally, in public housing in Barcelona, family rooms, living rooms, master bedrooms are gone for good. So you won't find them anymore. And I think that that's a great news. And meanwhile, at the office, we have pushed this idea further in many other projects, as you can imagine, defining ambiguous domesticities, but also redefining the relation between care, labor, and housing. Probably something that we couldn't do at 110 rooms. So let me move this. I'm going to stop here. Yeah, sorry. Among other projects, nowadays we are building in Sant Feliu, close by Barcelona, here, a social housing project in which apartments are similar to those at Provença. The novelty that here is that we arrange a 6-room, so an extra room compared to Provença. That is actually, as you will see, a semi-exterior one. Is precisely this one that I'm pointing out with the arrow. A room that can be a terrace or an interior space at the same time. And building regulations here are also manifested through this room that extends in cantilevers to the maximum allowed by law, occupying this maximum exterior surface. And here the patio is not close as in 110 rooms, but it is open. It is not open as 110 rooms, but it's closed, defining a climatic buffer that alongside these 6 rooms, both of them act as environmental control elements and reduction of home consumption resources, which when dealing with social housing is one of the main important things to deal with. And another light change is the position of the double rooms. As you probably saw in the previous images, in 110 rooms, we already use double rooms. We always use double rooms. And in this case, the double rooms are placed at the edge of the room, reconfiguring the type of space relation. And we always use these double rooms because for us, doors are actually our legal loopholes. So we found a loophole in the housing law that allow us to, through the opening of and through the definition of doors, to be ambiguous, legally speaking. So our topologies are also ambiguous in the way they answer to housing regulations. The doors allow us to consider 2 spaces as one, legally speaking, and that is a trick that assures that, legally speaking, any space can also be any program. So all rooms have the same amount of light, ventilation, and surface regulation, surface amount. And we like to think that this way of addressing the floor plan also defines legal inclusivity. So anything, any room can answer to any legal demand. On the other hand, the ground floor contains a public infrastructure for domestic care that provides supports to the neighbors living above, but also to the neighbors around. And this space allows literally to pass through the building. So the street enters the building connected one side to the other, which there's a park. And you might actually ask what means public infrastructure for domestic care. Actually, we don't know yet. It's something that we are still defining. So the drawings are, at this point, as simple as this one, very precarious drawing, because we are nowadays in conversations with the city council, defining this new type of public space in which actually proposes to understand domestic care as part of the city infrastructure, not as part of the private house or the private or within the privacy of the apartment, but rather as something that is related with the city at large. And it's something that I have been working on in these last years. We have been researching about similar spaces, in particular urban kitchens, or what we call urban kitchens, a new type of cooking space that does not happen within the privacy of the house, but happens in the public realm as part of a metropolitan network. And they are always used daily by thousands of citizens. We have researched about 3 cities in which in this last decades, hundreds of them, so hundreds of urban kitchens have emerged. And that has happened in Lima, in Mexico City, and Tokyo. So you're seeing actually photographs of them. We are actually nowadays working on mapping them meticulously with a lot of care, and a book is coming out probably, hopefully, in the coming months about this new type. And for me, what is interesting is that this type of kitchen redefines domestic care labor, its spaces, its labor economies, and it's the bodies that carry it out. And is able to dismantle former social imbalances produced by a type of work that usually happens in the invisibility and actually of the house, and actually usually in an unregulated manner within the privacy of that house, most of the cases. So the fact that suddenly care is part of the public realms not only allows visibility, but as was mentioning, allows us to rethink the value of it. And as if in these kitchens, we see how the idea of care is deeply blurred with the kitchen, and the idea of the kitchen is deeply blurred with the city. and the urban scale, we started reflecting on the values of defining domestic spaces that are actually diffuse in nature as these kitchens. So spaces that do not happen only within what we consider the limits of our house. We started to reflect about the capacity of houses, of what we call diffuse houses. In 2013, when we were asked to design an installation for an archetypal house, and at the time, what we did was to just radically cut a magazine, and by cutting out the rooms on domestic spaces from an architectural book and disperse them, we tried to produce new forms of ambiguity. And that was actually our floor plan and the project that we presented. And with it, we built a model by extruding the rooms far beyond their normal scale. So that when looking to the model, it was very difficult to distinguish if we were proposing a house or a town or a whole city itself. And the floor plan actually invited to imagine all kinds of configurations. It was difficult to say if it was just one house or many, and where each of them started at end. The diffuse house is an open entity that challenges the limits of the domestic space and challenges predetermined configurations and programs. Thinking of an extended house is a way to aim for new possible ways of coexisting that requires, and we have to accept that this typology requires permanent citizen consensus and dissent. So limits are not never and should never be clear. And we are now starting the construction of a domestic space in Barcelona, which pushed this idea of coexistence further. Here, the house is like a garden, a domestic landscape where there's no indoors or outdoors as such, where there's no domestic program as such. And where living spaces do inhabit thanks to a permanent mediation. It is a mediation that is facilitated by a roof. Let me show the diagram. A roof that acts as a climatic buffer and that facilitates climatic control, mediating air temperature, air flows, water accessibility, etc. But this mediation is also facilitated by an earthy ground. So the ground would be earth, muddy, that supports the life of plants, but where they can root, but also where animals can nest. Years ago, we received a commission to design also a non-conforming space for a dance performance titled Epica, which choreography was designed by Aymar Pérez Galí in the picture, and I completely recommend to follow his work. I'm a huge fan. Aymar has worked about the impact of AIDS on Spanish and Latin American dance communities. Due to the impact of AIDS, HIV, in particular in the 80s, the fluids, sweating, were on the target, and even sweat, as I was mentioning, became considered a dangerous thing, a dangerous fluid. In the dance studios, some tensions arose between dancers who sweated and they were liquid, right? And sweat is also used in his work as a political tool, able to give voice to subaltern figures. So he make subaltern figures sweat. So he asked us to define a space where bodies could be emancipating through sweating, empowering the tactile sense of bodies. And at the same time, he asked us to that a space should negate the possibility of recognizing gender through the body image. And obviously, how to answer to that difficult question, what we did was to basically to design a non-scopic device, a black box, basically, a complete dark room, which was not parallel to anything, and that enhanced sensorial factors by means of a movable, actually, ceiling. And in a complete darkness, the ceiling would move, reducing the sense of a space, changing the temperature, humidity, and pressure of a space. It is incredible, but when you don't see anything, you feel a lot. So just how the amount of oxygen and air is compressed, you can feel it. Very impressive. And in the performance, there were 4 dancers that could not be perceived, actually. Again, total darkness. They were delivering their energy and offering themselves as a space-time excitation agent. So they were exciting the move in an epic session of techno, where bodies align with other bodies in darkness to carry out a cellular liberation, as Aymar loved to call it, beyond the body through dance. And let me show, it is very difficult to take pictures, as you can imagine, so I brought a video, and hopefully you can hear my sound. Can you hear my sound? Good. I feel things. I taste things. As you can imagine, it's very difficult to explain a project that it happens in complete darkness. But for us, what was very important is that this theatrical resource, just a simple black box with a movable ceiling, produce an affect experience, freeing the perception of bodies, that lack of gender, and giving voice then to the struggles from that we generate or that have been generated by Western canons of heterosexual norms. So there we really felt as bodies. Similarly, we conceive an exhibition that transcended the limits of a space and conventional formats, and its design aimed to create an open narrative, providing at the same time a background for artworks. The project proposed a set of dispersed spaces where visitors could experience different scales and levels of interaction with the exhibited objects. Everything was exposed equally, allowing the visitor to define their own experience according to their way of seeing things. And walls were textiles, as you see, allowing to be transposed anywhere. So visitors were kind of ghosts, being able to enter and exit everywhere. So there was not a preset entrance or exit. There was not a preset order of the show and ways of seeing. While some projects reflect on the value of non-conforming spaces, these ones that I have shown, others, the ones that I'm going to show, reflect on the value of transgressing norms and how to transgressing norms that do conform, let's say. Or also they do reflect on how to define norms and instructions of use that have the potential to be transgressed. So they cannot conform by themselves because they can always be transgressed. We were invited to do an installation in the Gallery Monambiente in Buenos Aires that had to reflect on the idea of instructions of use. As architects, we were asked to send a set of instructions of use to the gallery, and those instructions of use had to be performed by the builders, the building team, very freely, with no supervision, at least from our side. So with that goal in mind, we sent to the gallery a set of instructions that had to be the instructions to be able to build a Buckminster Fuller dome, which was published in Holler's catalog, this here, but also used to be sold in the very famous magazine, Popular Science magazine, to the US houses. So somehow the project was also a critical reenactment of this culture of do-it-yourself that was so popular during those years, in particular in the US. And we sent these instructions literally to the gallery, stopping any communication afterwards. And we knew that we were aware that the dome, this is square meters, it was actually, the dome was around, the original dome occupied 43 square meters, which was actually much bigger than the space gallery, which was just around 24 square meters. So it didn't fit. There was an impossibility to follow that instructions. So that impossibility forced a necessary appropriation by the builders. And there was a necessary adaptation of the original dome. This dome was originally built with metal bars, and actually they couldn't get metal bars, so they used just broom handles. The dome was originally built with a very complex joint, and there was and here they couldn't achieve the same technical quality, and they just they invented the joint based on cutting parts of a plastic hose for watering the plants. And the dome, as I mentioned, it didn't fit in the space, so they needed to decide which part of the dome needed to be built. And we find, yes, the result is very clumsy, as you can see, but we find it very beautiful. There's a kind of some beauty in clumsiness, and that was the first time we test the idea of instructions of use. So to define architecture just through words, basically. And since then, we have been interested on instructions of use as much as their interpretation, subversion, or transgression, as I was mentioning before, and definitely their appropriation, right? Users' appropriation. So soon after, actually, this probably is our first project. Soon after we founded the office, Mayo won a competition held by the City Council of Barcelona. With the crisis, the city was filled with empty lots that couldn't be built, that needed to be occupied in order to avoid decay. The competition demanded the design of an ephemeral urban space that had to last at least 15 years. And the budget was extremely, extremely tight, like, 30 euros per square meter, like this tight, like crazy tight. And obviously, it was not enough to fulfill all neighbors' needs and wishes. We went through a public participation, of course. So therefore, radically, we decided to design a light infrastructure that could grow and allow mutability through time and encourage citizens' appropriation and social engagement. The proposal is based on a definition of a regular grid, as you see, of poles, lighting poles that organizes the urban space and holds lighting as well as other electrical systems. And the grid is finalized with this a cable system that works as temporary support for different users that neighbors can complement through time. And the size of the grid was defined to fit the maximum possible neighbors' requirements and wishes. So we knew them through the public participation, and we just made sure that legally speaking, and especially speaking, those uses could happen through time. And alongside the grid, what we did was to define a set of instructions that sum up legal and architectural conditions and facilitate neighbors to continue by themselves the square through a continuous process of public participation. So the project proposed the idea of a urban space understood as an unfinished space. And we like to think that we define not a building, actually, that we didn't build, that we define not a square, that we didn't build a square, but we designed the potential conditions of the square that will allow its open definition in the futures by means of social consensus and dissent. Dissent always happens, of course, when you do public participation as well. In fact, since the grid was built, these are our very abstract set of instructions that summarize all of them, basically through codes, etc. Very oversimplified, but very easy to read for the neighbors. And since the grid was built, it was completed. It has been completed in many ways. And now, if you visit, even the poles are in another color, painted in another color. So, as a result of many neighbors' meetings and discussions during these years, they decided to place shadows, they decided to take them out, they decided to place a playground and a fountain, a temporary market, benches, and so on and so on. And we proceed in a similar way when we were asked, and I think I'm gonna jump this project. When we were asked to define an identity of a restaurant, I'm gonna go very fast. But in this restaurant, I wanted to talk about it because, again, it's a system, it's a special system that was defined through a set of instructions of use that could be developed in different sites. But for us, what was very interesting in this case was to understand the value of the construction. So the political value of how things are built. And I'm going to talk about this in the coming project. So there you see how things are built very clearly. We have been working recently on this idea, on the political capacity of a construction detail and its construction processes. On the political capacity of a construction budget, where the money goes, all these decisions to have a very important value. Around a year ago, we received the commission to expand and refurbish an existing house in Connecticut, very close by New York City, but also to design all furniture pieces. And actually a lot of furniture pieces. And actually the project that started, the whole project started with an anecdote. We were in the middle of the pandemic. So initially we had the intuition to work with artisans and craft workers. So basically to work with small practices in order to support them economically during the pandemic. And that was, again, as I was mentioning, where the money goes. So a political decision. Who are you gonna support with this project? And one day talking with the metallist about the production of a chair that we designed using some industrial elements, because also we wanted to make it very simple, very easy to build, etc. Suddenly he asked us, the metallist asked us to replicate the industrial elements by himself. So apparently he would get greater benefit doing them manually instead of buying the industrial pieces. And there is when we realize that we have to be very aware where the money goes. And we then started to design everything based on that idea. The architecture and the furniture pieces would be designed in a way that would require a lot of time. So they are very difficult to be built. But we would use very few materials. So there's a lot of time, almost no materiality. And showing the idea of time for us also, we wanted to show the idea of time and manual making, also through accepting mistakes in the process of manual making, imperfections. So the value of something is defined by its production process, by how it is made, not by its materiality. Most of materials are very cheap, but rather at the end, the product was very expensive because it contained a lot of time. And despite its industrial materials, these images about the chairs, lawns, the chairs, stools, armchairs, they're all produced manually. We love this kind of ironic condition of them. And you see that they also are finished with this iridescent finish, which actually captures a lot of the mistakes of process. There's a lot of marks in it, and also their color changing depending on the light that impact on them. And we decided that these structures would be covered with a large diversity of handcraft textiles to offer diverse types of comforts to answer to different seasons. So some textiles are warmer for winter, others colder for summer. And sometimes the chair can even disappear under this kind of huge amount of textiles. So these structures are actually designed in order to disappear. And we did a lot of we did a lot of search trying to find artisans that could be able to blow large masses of glass to form this lamp, which actually is the representation of the maximum capacity of breath of an artisan, the amount of air that that our lungs can contain. And the form of this lamp is the representation of this action of blowing in one blow. And the form talks therefore about the process of making and the body that could make it possible. So it talks again about the idea of labor that is behind. And we produce smaller glasses that were used for floor lamps, and as this one, and large ones for the large hanging lamps. And these the small ones, the glass is supported on a light metal bar. I have to play this to make you feel how light it is. It is very light. So as you see, the light metal bar is in a delicate equilibrium. So it always moves it's almost all the time, almost falling apart, let's say. And we like that for many reasons. First, because it forced the collaboration of two artisans, the metallist and the glass blower. So it forced a social relation, very important. And then also, they were forced to talk in order to control exactly the weight of glass blown in order to reduce the amount of metal used, right? And as you see, the structure moves all the time due to airflows, making it structural efforts also visible. So how it works, structurally speaking, is always visible in a daily manner. And the former house was designed around the 60s, using colonial style. A very conflictive type of decor, especially in the US nowadays. So as we have done in other pieces that you see that the process of making is turned visible, we started deconstructing its colonial decor, you see. So we started deconstructing the decoration, but actually we left parts of it, fragments. So there were fragments of all decorations, of all colonial decorations left there as traces of a past that acknowledge its past, but also understands its conflict, symbolic condition. And the architecture, so you see, there were a lot of leftovers all around the house. And the architecture is also built in a similar way as the furniture. So it's very interesting how we started with the furniture, and the furniture allows us to think about the architecture. So it's an architecture reflects about this way of making an idea of value, capturing value. And this is the main space, I would say, of the house, which walls and ceilings are covered with a very cheap insulation material that usually is not installed as a finishing layer. So it's always covered. It's designed to be covered. It is very fragile. It's paper, actually. And similar to the textiles, it works as a textile. It behaves as a textile. So similar to the textile, this material requires a lot of sewing and a lot of tailoring points to fix it and make it work. And it's very fragile. So it breaks open often. So it demands a lot of time to be built and a lot of care. In another project, we turn visible through form and materiality, and I'm almost there, construction procedures as a way to embody architectural laws. These are like the mistakes that I was referring to and the tailoring that I was referring to before. So in another project, we turn visible through form and materiality construction procedures as a way to embody architectural laws and regulations, how to formalize laws. We were asked to transform our existing space into an exhibition gallery in Trafalgar Street in Barcelona that would question the format of the white cube. So the idea of a gallery of a white gallery as a preset exhibition space. The directors of the gallery invited us to reflect on what a contemporary exhibition space should look like. The project is critical with the understanding of the idea of a gallery as a neutral white, assuming that a white space is neutral because it is white, and we know that white is not neutral per se, of course, and space is never neutral as well. So we cannot understand space as neutral. We never should understand space as neutral. So understanding that condition, the proposal seeks to create a specific site away from a generic white envelope and fake neutrality. A site that would define itself, including the traces and memories of the past, but also future ones to come. The exhibition space is a place of narrative, impermanent transformation that recalls Palais de Tokyo, of course, you will see, where all the elements, continent, and exhibition content acts as reversible and mutable overlays in time. Responding to this idea of the exhibition space as a place of transformation, we wanted to make visible and meaningful the process of architectural project by representing technical and normative solutions in a direct and explicit way. We basically just did those things that needed to be improved in order to legally, so we took the law and we just applied the law, and we took those elements that we needed to improve in order to legally open that space as a gallery. And basically, there's light and a small bathroom. So a lighting system was installed, and a small bathroom we needed to be constructed, and a fire protection needed to be improved. That was very key. So we covered the ceiling with a continuous coating, and we have faced the problem of what to do with these very beautiful cast iron columns that definitely needed to be covered for fire protections, but we didn't use the same coating as the ceiling because that would damage them. And we couldn't actually afford sprinkles based on the budget. So actually the client rented this space because of these columns. And suddenly we decided to cover them. It was the only way. And we decided to cover them through a very cheap fireproof gypsum, building a box around them as a time capsule. And one of the first invited guests, one of the first artists actually, Luz Broto, understood the capacity of the space to be a palimpsest. so a space of impermanent transformation, and decided suddenly to, let me show what she did, to unveil again the columns as an art piece. Obviously, it was not our responsibility anymore, let's say. The artist took it, and she basically sells this piece that the columns can be exposed after the piece is achieved by collectors and museums. And what is very interesting for us is that this work piece unveils our work done in relation with building regulations, but also puts them in crisis. So suddenly the whole project is in crisis. We actually collaborate with the same artist, with Luz Broto, in another project. And I'm going to finish today with this very tiny project, because I think that sometimes tiny sizes, tiny projects in lifetime are actually the most meaningful ones. And you will see a lot of references to this particular one. And we were asked to design an installation in the Architectural Association in Barcelona, which is actually a very beautiful building placed in front of the cathedral. So one of the main, this is the Architectural Association. This is actually the gallery space. And it's placed in front of a most central spaces in the city of Barcelona. But usually the space is always occupied by exhibitions. So you never have the feeling of this outdoor space. This is it. So what we did was basically, with the awareness of not being able to see the outdoor space, we focus our attention of the outdoor space. We used the whole money. At that moment, we didn't know what to do really. So we decided to use all our budget to hire a topographic map that would unveil the reality of this outdoor space. And very stupidly, we realized, thanks to this map and this drawing, that in the lower points, we had the drainage of the city of Barcelona. Yes, we didn't need that drawing, of course. We are architects, we could have guessed that. But thanks to the drawing, we realized about that. And suddenly, we decided to radically block the drainage of the city. My computer is going slow, I don't know why. Maybe it's tired because it's 9 p.m. But basically, what we did was to block the drainage of the city, because we expected during the week of the opening and the week of the installation, pouring rain, like a lot of rain in the city of Barcelona. So we wanted to flood the center of Barcelona and generate a fake lake. Obviously, here there's a critical point of view towards how we have designed a public space in Barcelona, that basically everything has been paved and everything is perfectly paved, very convenient, but at the same time, very biased as well, and neglecting other types of uses. So what we did also was to suddenly we draw on top of the topographic map this lake, and we place this lake in the space, in the exhibition space, which is this one, waiting for the opening and waiting for the rain to come. And as always, as you design something, it never happens. So not even one drop of rain fall in that day during the opening, not even during the whole week. So nothing happened. But luckily, and you have to imagine this space filled with hundreds of, architects and friends and so on, wondering what was going on. Nothing was going on. Nothing was exhibit. But luckily, we had the drawing. And luckily, bit by bit, the visitors started to realize about the blockage that we did on the public space, and that the drainage were blocked. And they started to imagine this lake, even if the lake was not there. And that day we realized, and we learned a lot, and we learned that it's sometimes much more powerful, the imagination actually, that would have achieved. The city of Barcelona is extremely dirty. I mean, the center is extremely dirty, so the lake wouldn't have been beautiful. But the visitors imagine this fantastic landscape, kind of renaturalizing or I don't know, turning back green and watery the center of Barcelona. And it was, of course, much better than what we could have achieved. So sometimes we like to think that it's not about what it is, but what it is about, or what it can allow to be. So it's the potentiality of architecture, not architecture itself. And with this, I'm going to stop talking. And thank you for your attention for an hour until 9 p.m., which is very late.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm not sure whether you can hear us yet. Well, you talked about the beauty of clumsiness. I think we both achieved it. Sincerely, our apologies for the technical aspects of tonight. Sometimes the hybrid technical part is pretty difficult, but I believe the students are very happy, and it was a very interesting lecture. We already have some comments in the chat of how great it was, so now we can wait for some questions. Maybe Eve can open with some questions, and we can see whether the students want to hop in to this studio to ask some as well.
Okay.
Lisa?
Thank you.
Yes, so thanks again for this great lecture. I was very happy. I think it's very nice that you not only do research, but that it's also translated in a form of architecture that is very pleasing. And it's rare that you have this nice combination of both. And also I think there were very different projects, which is very nice. So small scale, large scales, minimal, so that's really nice. I had a question about the 110 rooms. I very much like the project. I listened also to some online lectures that you gave about this project. And I was actually expecting that in the plinth or on the ground floor, the project would have a collective kitchen. But it does not. So do you consider the city itself as a collective kitchen, or is it my confusion?
Things do happen lightly, let's say, and slowly. Now we're actually, we work in a project for the government of Mexico in Aguascalientes, in which it was a social housing project in which we placed, it was a collective care infrastructure. More than kitchens, there were also daycares and kitchens, of course, and many other amenities that were managed. It was partially managed by they were partially managed by the neighbors and partially managed by the municipality. So it was a very interesting mix, and that's actually what precisely we're trying to implement now in the social housing. So in our social housing building that I showed, probably is the first one that we will be able to build a collective kitchen in relation with the houses. You know, when I started talking about kitchenless city, probably for us, and kitchenless city meant not only rethinking about care, but also rethinking about the typology. So for us, it has been easier to implement the redefinition of a typology. By that, I mean to think about housing typology critically, this idea of the nuclear family, this idea of empowering heteropatriarchy has been easier to push forward through projects than the idea of care. And that tells a lot, because care has been used as a political tool, and cooking in particular, to not only control consume, to implement consume, for instance, something that we have to reduce nowadays. But there was a moment in time that it was considered better to consume more, let's say. So it was actually through the kitchen and the redefinition of how we care for each other that consume was increased, especially during after the Second World War. And I think that all those changes were redefined through the idea of love as well, as Silvia Federici mentions, and that in her work that she uses the term love to relate to care. So the work of love is the work of care. And the feeling of the idea of family was started to be also related with those types of cares practices. So cooking for the family, etc. And it's an idea, it's a construction, a cultural construction that it's 20th century. It's just 20th century, so it's very new if we think about it. But it's so rooted within our society that to change that will take time, I guess. So now, bit by bit, we are realizing, and more probably in Europe, that we have an aging society that is very worrying, and that our social system, of the care social system, it is based on the idea of family. And we have a huge change of nuclear family, and in particular, heteropatriarchal families. And we are living a huge social change, not only because of aging, but also because of family structures. They're changing very fast and very rapidly. So how care was defined until now, it cannot be continued. It is not sustainable, not only economically sustainable, but socially is not sustainable anymore. So I guess that in the next decades, we will see how care will be redefined, not only by collective kitchens, because it is one type of a strategy, but definitely what we will see is that how care that has been always related, and cooking, for instance, that has been always related with the idea of a house, will suddenly start moving outside the domestic sphere, because it cannot be sustained by the domestic sphere anymore. So, and then again, I think that one of the things also that we have learned is that there's no one solution. So the idea of, one type, the nuclear family type, it is not the way to go, to have one type again, but rather to have all types that do allow different occupations, different appropriations, or different types for a wider social reality.
Do you sometimes get blocked by people who are just not as open-minded, who are like, especially in our culture, like very stiff-minded about some ideas about living, about like having a family? Do you sometimes get confronted with that?
Of course. If you Google at Arts Daily, once in a while, they always republish one of a very old interview, because there are so many haters. When internet is based on hate, basically, in internet use, I mean. So haters are very positive to promote web pages and to promote content. So when you have a lot of haters, you're very successful. And also it's easier to have haters than lovers, or haters to express themselves easily. And I'm saying this because it's very common to find a lot of resistance. But again, that's a type of resistance that is very natural in a sense, because again, our culture is so rooted within that ideology or in that cultural construction that it's surprisingly contradicting demographic realities, is contradicting economic realities. But despite that, we keep on repeating it as a cliche, and that's why it is normal. And I like that, actually. I think it's very important to have, I always use the idea of a kitchenless living or a kitchenless city as a provocation to start a conversation. Not that I'm promoting to live without kitchens, but rather to understand the values that have been built within that domestic piece, that we're able to get rid of others. For instance, we can sleep in the living room and so on, but the idea of we can not have a bedroom, but the idea of not having a kitchen is something that we cannot accept. So it is, it is very interesting, at least to be aware of these constructions that are biased.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions also. If you saw indeed the project 110 rooms as a provocation or as something to be developed further on, because it's what you see inside the project also, that you could say there is this generic room inside, in opposition to the more function or program specific room, which has definitely also its qualities. So why did you decide to make all, I can imagine that it is kind of provocative to make all the same rooms, but it also has a lot of qualities. If you have bigger and smaller rooms or other shaped rooms, that still you could inhabit the way you want, as is the fact, I believe, in Germany, in Switzerland. You've got a corridor, an enfilade of different rooms of different sizes, and you inhabit it the way you want, whether you want a bigger bedroom and a smaller living room, or the opposite is your choice. So why the really generic or the similar spaces?
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It's also a provocation about thinking about the political capacity of a typology. And yes, I agree with the idea of, again, the diversity of types is necessary, but definitely, if you think about the typology, for instance, that you have described about a corridor which connects different sizes of rooms, that implies, for instance, a set of equality in terms of accessibility. I wrote recently a text about Lux Guyer that is going to be published hopefully soon. She's actually considered the first women architect to open an office in Switzerland, and in the 30s, and her late 20s, I don't recall now, like that period of time in between words, and it was very interesting because she was doing minor changes, really, minor changes in housing typology. One of the changes that radical changes that she did was in the master bedroom, or in the major bedroom. She placed 2 doors in each side of the bed instead of 1. So suddenly there was not one access to the main bedroom, but rather 2 access in both sides of the bed. So in that way, for instance, you establish a set of hierarchy. Just through defining accessibility, how you access the spaces, you establish hierarchy. So the idea of eliminating social hierarchy, for instance, can be done actually to assuring that you have equal access, as you were referring, for instance, a corridor with different size of rooms, right? They're kind of all equal, let's say. It just depends on how you occupy them, you're completely right. But that's radically different from the idea of entering a large room in which then you have, so I think that it is very interesting to be aware of how space to establish social hierarchies. And in the case of Lux Guyer, it was clear. She was willing to say, okay, both people, the 2 people that do sleep in this bed are equal because they do have their own door. Yeah.
What I also liked in your lecture is the issue that you addressed with the where the money goes, so that the money goes to labor, to people, and that the money doesn't go to the material, and so you really limit the resources that you use. I think that's a very, very beautiful way of being sustainable, which was not, I think, until now addressed as a theme. So I think that's something that really adds to the list of possibilities. So hopefully we'll see some of that returning in some of the images later this week.
I also really liked the basis of you talking about using these legal aspects as like your boundary conditions to design a case, to confront an audience or a user with it. But I'm wondering, do you sometimes want to stretch those like legal aspects, or do you always just play around with them? Do you really want to go like as a rebel against it and try to stretch those, or?
Look, we always have to work within legality. That cannot be denied, because as architects we have such a responsibility afterwards. It's like you cannot play with that. But it is interesting. Yeah, I think that we have to put the law to the limit in order to push the law to change. laws change very slowly. Architecture is faster. Even if architecture is very slow, we are faster than laws. So, in order to put pressure on, on changing those laws, you need to have, not only one building. Obviously, you need to have a set of not only discussions but also constructions that are always already like questioning the law. And that's why I found very interesting to find, we call them legal loopholes, but they're not legal loopholes. They're like, ways of reinterpreting the law that allow you to be very creative. And obviously that creativity for us, in our case, is to look for social justice. So, like okay, how we can find a way to, dismantle certain biases through finding these small cracks in the law.
Okay, then I think we'll round up for the evening. So thank you very much, Anna, for this very interesting lecture. Also, the lecture will be, it's recorded and it will be put on Jokerweek.be